It's really important to have good start parts. Start parts are the document templates that are going to make sure that you get started on the right foot every time you create a new document in SolidWorks. So let's do that right now. Let's head to File, New, and I'm going to create a new assembly and hit OK. Now I'm going to cancel the default dialog here. And you may notice that my default assembly looks a little bit different from yours. Several things may be different. For example, the screen here on my screen is going to be a perfectly solid light gray, whereas yours might be a gradient. Also, you'll see in my Feature Manager design tree, I have some axes here, already ready to use. And there are several other things that you don't see that are different. So let's set up some of those things and save them in your default presets so that your life will be a little bit easier as we move forward. Now the first thing will be to go to Tools and all the way down to Options, and this time instead of System Options, let's head to our Document Properties and over to Units. Let's make sure that your units are set to millimeters, grams, and seconds for your default document. And our image quality is set somewhere up pretty high. I like to have high quality images here. Also, under Plain Display, I like to set the front face color to kind of a, grayish blue color, something like that. And I like to set the back face color to kind of a dark maroon. You don't have to do that, but that's what I like. Hit OK and OK. Now you may also notice that I have a display pane visible by default. That's these 4 columns right here. To make that visible, you click on these little arrows for Hide or Show Display Pane. I like to have that visible, especially for beginners, because it has lots of helpful information in it. For example, we can see that my planes are all here, but they are invisible, and I can tell that because this column shows them grayed out. If I click on one of them, it'll come to color, and we'll be able to see it in our viewport. And if I rotate around, you'll see that maroon color on the back face of my plane. It's really useful to know which side is the front and which side is the back of a plane. So, if I show all of these planes, it'll be a little bit easier to see where we are in space. Also, I have these axes here, X, Y, and Z axes. SolidWorks doesn't have those by default, but I find them really useful. Let's delete all of those out of here, and I'll show you how to add them yourself. I'm going to hide these planes for a minute. I'll go to my front plane and Control-click on the top plane. Then I'll head to my Assembly Tools and over to the Reference Geometry dropdown and grab my Axis tool. That's going to put an axis between the front and top planes, which happens to be the x-axis, as you can see with our little triad down here in the corner. Let's hit OK. That'll create an axis that we can rename X, and hit Enter. Perfect. I'll grab the front plane now and the right plane by Control-clicking the two of them. Reference Geometry, Axis, OK. And this one is going to be our y-axis. And finally, let's grab the top plane and the right plane, Reference Geometry, Axis, OK, and we'll call that Z. Now I like for those to be invisible, so let's click each one of those to hide them. Click on X, Shift-click on Z to get everything in between, right-click any one of those, and say Add to New Folder. We'll rename that Axes. Now you have access to the axes whenever you want them. And we can head over to our Appearances tab, drop down in our Scene Preferences. Let's double-click the background color, and I like to set that to a solid color rather than a gradient or an image, and then choose a really light gray, something way up there. Hit OK, and I find that that keeps my scene really nice and clean. Now the fact that we're looking at the Display Manager right now is actually saved in our template, so it's important that we go back and click the Feature Manager design tree again, so that will be visible by default whenever we create a new document. I also like to make sure that my planes are invisible by default on new documents. There are several reasons for that. And finally, to save this, let's head to File, Save As, and in Save As Type, let's change that to Assembly Templates. That's going to bring me to my default Assembly Templates folder in Program Data, SolidWorks, SolidWorks 2013, Templates. And here's a really important point. When SOLIDWORKS creates a new document, in certain situations, it's going to use whichever document happens to come first alphabetically in your template list. This is ridiculous. I wish they would change this. But to get around that, what we have to do is make sure that when we save our file, I just like to add 00 at the beginning of the file name. That'll make sure that it sorts first in the list, and we're sure to get it every time we create a new document in SOLIDWORKS. So keep that in mind. It's a hack, but it works. Let's hit save. I'm going to replace my existing one. We'll close this up, and let's test it. File new, assembly, cancel the dialog, and there we go. We have our axes, and we have our display pane visible, and a gray background. Perfect. Now we need to repeat this process one more time. Let's go to File New and do the same exact thing for a part document. I'll make my display pane visible. I create those axes. I set my scene background to gray. Tools, Options, Document Properties, Units to millimeters. We'll set our plain display front and back face colors and set our image quality up pretty high. Hit OK. File Save As. I'm going to save this as a part template, once again in my templates directory, and once again making sure to add that 00 at the beginning of our part name so that it sorts first alphabetically in the list. Hit Save, Save, and finally, one last thing we need to do. Let's go to Tools, Options one more time, and down to our Default Templates tab. In Parts, we want to click the ... over here and choose that default template. Same thing for assemblies. Let's choose that template that we just created and hit OK. And then we click OK because we're finished. So now, whenever we create a new document, like an assembly, it's going to be exactly the way that we want. And if we say New Part within that assembly, it's going to create a new part that uses that same template. Perfect. Don't need to save that. Discard my changes. Okay, so that should get us started on the right foot every time we create a new document in SOLIDWORKS. I hope you're excited because I am ready to jump back in and make some stuff.